Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to be covering a topic from Cambridge IGCSE Biology, the topic of movement into and out of cells and subtopic diffusion. Now, in this video, we're going to be learning all about diffusion, what it is, how it works, and how diffusion takes place across a cell. And also, we're going to be learning about the Brownian motion of particles. All right. So we'll start off with diffusion. Now, what is diffusion? Diffusion is a very important process that you need to understand. So diffusion, I'm first going to explain it to you in very simpler terms, and then we'll move on to the actual definition that you'd need to study, right? Now, I'm going to first explain it to you very simply through this diagram given over here. So in this diagram, you see this blue rectangle. This is the space, right? And you see these green little circles, these are the particles, right? Now, what you notice in this diagram, you notice how these green particles are all concentrated in one end of this space, while the other end of the space is completely empty. It has no particles at all, right? So what diffusion is these particles have the natural tendency to spread out from this region where there are more of them to the regions where there are less of them. So this region, which is called the high concentration region, the particles in this region spread out from the region of high concentration to the regions of lower concentration. And that's what diffusion is all about. It's the spreading of particles from the regions of high concentration to the regions of low concentration, right? So now let's go to the proper definition that you all have to learn for your exam. Diffusion is the net movement of molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration down a concentration gradient as a result of their random movement. Now, this is a very long and elaborate definition, so let's take it little by little. Diffusion is the net movement of molecules. Now, if you take these molecules don't have a clear pathway. Basically, these molecules just have a random pathway and a random movement that they show, right? But even though they are all moving randomly, so every particle is moving, right? Every particle is moving with the diffusion, but their movement is random. It's a random movement that they show. But overall, if you look at the net movement, you can see how the net movement is from this region towards this region. So it's from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration. That's why we include the term net movement. All right. So let's get back to our definition. Diffusion is the net movement of molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration down a concentration gradient. Now, what exactly does a concentration gradient mean? You see, this region is the region having high concentration, right? And this region is the region showing low concentration. So this difference, the difference in the concentrations is what we refer to as the concentration gradient. And since it's moving from the higher concentration to the lower concentration, we call this moving down a gradient, right? So it moves down a gradient, down the concentration gradient as a result of their random movement, right? So these key terms are very important. It is the net movement of molecules from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration down a concentration gradient as a result of their random movement. So this is the definition that you need to write if you are asked for it at the exam. This is the definition of diffusion. All right. Now, so this is what diffusion is all about. So you might be wondering why we are learning this for biology, right? Where exactly does this apply inside a biological organism? So here's the answer. diffusion takes place across every single cell of our body. Now, all of us know the structure of a cell, right? So this is what a simple cell looks like. We have a nucleus in the center, we have a cell membrane, right? And you know, multicellular organisms like us have millions such cells in our body, right? So would you believe me if I tell you that diffusion takes place across almost every single cell of our body, right? So where exactly does diffusion take place? Why does diffusion need to take place in our cells? So here's the answer to that question. Now, I'm just going to draw up some little drawings here for you to understand this better. So let's imagine that there is some kind of a substance, some kind of a useful substance that is outside the cell. And as you can see, that useful substance that is outside the cell is there in a high concentration, right? And let's imagine inside the cell, that substance is there in very low concentration, like I have drawn, right? So would you understand that you would now understand that these particles can move from this region of high concentration to the region of low concentration through diffusion. So more of these particles, these useful substances, are going to get into the cell through the process of diffusion, right? So diffusion is important in absorbing useful substances into the cell, all right? And in a very similar manner, let's imagine that the cell has produced some waste products, which I'm drawing in red. So the cell has produced some waste products, which are there in high concentration inside the cell. And comparatively, outside the cell, there's less of it, lower concentration. So you can now understand that when there is something where there is one region of it having a high concentration and another region having a low concentration, diffusion is going to take place and these particles are going to move down the concentration gradient. So in other words, these waste substances will move out of the cell, right? So diffusion is also important in the removal of waste products outside the cell. So that's how diffusion is applicable in a living organism. Some substances move into the cells and some substances move out of the cells by diffusion through the cell membrane. So this cell membrane is a thin membrane. It's a partially permeable membrane that allows the diffusion of small molecules. All right. So that's what diffusion is all about. And now that we've understood that, let's go deeper into diffusion and see what factor drives diffusion. For example, how is it that these particles get the energy to diffuse from one place to another, right? So here's how it works. The energy for diffusion comes from the kinetic energy of random movement of molecules and ions. You see, if you take any molecule or any ion, these molecules are all in motion. They're all moving about and their movement is random. They have a random motion like what I'm drawing over here. It's a random motion that they show. So this random motion is known as Brownian motion. So here's a new term for you all to keep in mind. Brownian motion is the random motion shown by molecules and ions. And this random motion is a result of the kinetic energy of the particles. So all these particles contain kinetic energy, and that kinetic energy is what drives their random motion. So as the particles move randomly, they collide with each other and with the walls of their container, causing them to spread out and move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. So this is very important. The energy that drives diffusion is a result of the kinetic energy of the particles. So diffusion is driven by the kinetic energy of the particles. This kinetic energy, which gives rise to their random motion, that same kinetic energy is what drives diffusion as well, right? And on a separate note, we know that this kinetic energy is a measure of their motion, and this kinetic energy is directly related to the temperature. So if the temperature of this system rises, the kinetic energy too changes, and this increases in a higher rate of diffusion. So that's what you need to know about diffusion and Brownian motion. So now that we've understood that, let's try out a few questions from the question bank. All right, so here's our first question. And this is an easy question. This is regarding the definition of diffusion that we've learned about. So which options complete the paragraph? You need to fill in the blanks in this paragraph. Diffusion may be defined as the net movement of particles from a region of their, so we've learned the definition. We know that it's the net movement from a region of higher concentration to a region of their lower concentration, where the movement is down a concentration gradient. So these are the three answers: higher, lower, and down. And that is given by answer A. So that's the answer I'm going to choose. All right, so this is directly testing whether you know the definition of diffusion. And let's try out one more question before we wrap up. The diagram shows a test tube containing clear jelly. A drop of blue ink is injected into the middle. So in the middle, they have put in a drop of blue ink. The blue color spreads throughout the jelly. By which process does the blue ink spread? So this is pretty obvious as well. This is the region having a higher concentration, and all the other regions are having a lower concentration. So the process where particles move from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration is obviously diffusion. So that's the answer I'm going to have to choose. So that brings us to the end of this video. I hope all of you got a good understanding of this topic of diffusion. Stay tuned to the next video.
Subscribe us now for more videos and content.